Gliders, an area less explored, is my topic of choice for the key moments in history for safety and research for Professor Sean Barstow. My name is Shaylin Drake. As an introduction,
Walk, little walk, small talk, big thoughts, gonna tell them all just what I want.
I apologize for that interruption. Again, as an introduction, my name is Shaylin Drake, and I'm a master's student and USU Eastern Drones instructor, and I plan to pursue a glider rating as part of second semester's courses. This all got started back, I guess you could say, almost 20 years ago when I started flying RC airplanes. But the first time I flew an RC glider, it was absolutely amazing. I actually flew underneath myself. We went to the point of the mountain and chucked a glider off the edge of a cliff in the wind. There's no motor on it. And through slope soaring, basically, I got to fly what's called a zaggy underneath me. And then just this last July, I went on my very first glider flight ever. Okay, so we get the gist of it. Gliders are cooler than this presentation, but that's okay. In July, I went out to the Nephi airport and decided to go ahead and do a discovery flight, basically, in a glider. And it was the coolest experience ever. I've flown airplanes before, single engine airplanes. I've flown a Piper Archer, which was super fun. I've flown a Cessna 172. Flown in a DA-40 at that point. I've flown a DA-40 myself since then. And I'm sorry, but gliders are cooler, just like the interruptions keep telling you. I absolutely love glider flight. So I decided to focus on that for this presentation, and it's also kind of an opportunity for me. I would like to get my glider rating. I'm going to be focusing on that next semester, like I said. But there's also some more opportunities for me in that in Civil Air Patrol, because that is how we teach flight in Civil Air Patrol. So, gliders in aviation as a whole. 1804 was the first actual glider flight in the world, and it was from Sir George Calais in England. But as far as the United States goes, 1884 was the first one in the United States. I thought it was a really weird kind of separation between those two, 80 years, but whatever. Anyway, John C. Montgomery flew the very first glider in California. He died in 1911 after developing tandem gliders, and he was kind of messing around with aerodynamic airfoils, basically, to see what types of airfoil design would fly best as a glider, and he actually passed away in one of his test flights. But in my research, the 1960s and 70s were actually the biggest boom in glider flight itself, and we started seeing composite builds, fiberglass builds, different pieces of the glider itself were made out of wood and balsa still. We also saw kind of the ratio get established of glider flight. It began as a 25-to-1, and then through the construction boom, a 50-to-1 and 70-to-1 ratio even showed up. And then in the 1980s, which is really where I'm going to focus, our main safety focus in aeronautical design and aeronautical principles and basic understanding of weather all kind of popped up.
I run, they run, everybody run, run, and we're all just having fun. Sleigh ride, boat ride, piggyback ride, I'm gonna show 'em all how I can ride. 1, 2, 3, close your eyes and count to 4. I'm gonna hide behind my bedroom door. Crayons on walls, color on them all, draw until I've broken every law. I said don't stop, don't stop, don't stop talking to me. Stop, don't stop, giving me things. Stop.
Yes, gliders are cool. Gliding safely. The number one area of concern for gliders is the same as any other situation. 80% is pilot error. 80% of single engine accidents is pilot error, 80% of motorcycle accidents is pilot error, 80% of RC airplane accidents is pilot error, and we get into our human factors situations there. The pilot's improper control inputs resulted in every single safety issue I look up from the Soaring Society of America starts with that sentence. Every single one of them. So the top three that I found in my research, close to terrain is an issue. You are supposed to give minor inputs and proper inputs, and then you have to have a very deep understanding of weather when you're flying gliders. Arrow towing was the next largest area of accidents. The main kind of tips it gave there is to keep the toe inside at all times, and again, minor inputs, proper inputs. See and avoid was the last section. That's really just boiled down to checklists, keep your visual flight going and put minor inputs in. Those pilot inputs and pilot control are in every single one of those. 70% of glider accidents happen on landing from stalling and things like that. So that's what I found as far as gliding safety goes. And as a result, one of the things that has happened to help improve safety for glider flights is checklists and training. The assembly and pre-flight situations kind of have come up as a result of the actual person, event, and aircraft that I researched that I'll show in a few minutes. CFI requirements have actually quadrupled in the last 40 years for glider pilots, and then aeronautical and weather education has become a larger focus. Wally A. Scott was born in 1924 and passed away in 2003. This is the who that I'm focusing on. Obviously, he's a glider pilot, and he is mostly based out of the Western United States. His book, well, not his book, but a book written by Samantha Hilbert Thomas is called Whiskey Alpha, and it's focusing on the life of soaring legend Wally Scott. This person has broken more distance records in a glider than anyone on the face of the planet. And a lot of what we see today in assembly requirements and checklists for safety focuses are because of Wally Scott. The event itself is the Lewin B. Barringer Memorial Trophy. It started in 1948, and the trophy is given to the longest distance soaring flight from any type of launch other than an arrow tow. Wally Scott won this trophy 20 out of 26 years he competed in it. So, yeah, he was a little bit of a legend, obviously. His distances recorded were between 550 and 700 miles, again, without an arrow tow. And he woke up every single morning jumping up on the roof, looking out at the skies, trying to determine weather patterns through clouds and whatever lift he could or couldn't see. I was actually kind of surprised when I went and did my own glider flight. You can see lift, air movement from convection, basically, or where it creates lift, I guess would be a better way to put it. You can actually physically see that, especially if you're not colorblind. We actually trained on that for about 15 minutes when I did my glider flight. So it was kind of an interesting experience. He used to go out and do that every morning. And Samantha Hilbert Thomas wrote that any changes he needed to make, like he would come back and do them immediately. In our prompt for this presentation, it talks about a growth mindset for safety. And Wally Scott was a perfect example of that, because every single flight he made, he would come back and reflect on it, write down improvements that needed to be made, and his contributions were felt all over the gliding world, in piloting, in training, in checklists, in design, everywhere, because of this event that he would go fly and learn something from and come back and actually implement what he learned. AWS is probably one of the most common types of gliders. It is definitely the one that I flew. Mine was a twin AWS, so a tandem flyer, so that my instructor could sit behind me and I could sit in the front. The one that I flew was built in 1978, and these are the main two that Wally Scott flew. He stuck with them because of how safe they were, and because of how predictable they were, and because of how much training he had in each one. And they are still some of the most popular gliders to fly, especially if you are training or competing. So the results of Wally, his trophies, his life, boiled down to three main things. Assembly training, guidelines, and checklists is the #1 area. Before the 1980s, a lot of the accidents reported were from not putting the spar in correctly, or from a crooked wing, or from the yaw string not being placed properly, things that should be pretty easy to catch. And that assembly training started in the late 1970s, early 1980s. Guidelines for training itself, for assembly itself, manuals started to really double down in the 1980s, and Wally Scott was instrumental in handling those. And then checklists, the development of checklists, and having to properly train how to go through them and how to teach them. And then aerodynamic construction in and of itself was also one of the impacts from Wally Scott and his multiple trophies. They started really looking at minor tweaks in dihedral, T-tail versus V-tail, and that kind of thing for the type of competition you're looking at, and widening the fuselage a little bit up at the front. And then a safety focus. Through Soaring Society of America and other areas, there has been a huge uptick in CFI requirements for training properly for safety issues when it comes to gliding. References pages. My main reference was that book from Thomas in 2010, Whiskey Alpha, The Life of Soaring Legend Wally Scott. And then I do use Soaring Society of America quite a bit. That is where I have already started a bit of my training for my glider rating and plan to continue with that.